Hello. Yes. Oh, there we go. I thought I was going to introduce myself as Ethan. But no. I'm Genevieve.
And I'm Ethan.
Yes. And welcome to another episode of That GD Show. As you can see, Dave is not here. He is out of town, and he'll be back next week. But our amazing producer, who is always behind the scenes, is here today, filling his spot. Ethan!
Yes. I'm honored to be filling in with Dave. A little nervous because not many people can fill Dave's shoes, so I'll do my absolute best. One of the downfalls of tonight's show is my internet is out, so I am unfortunately producing this from my phone, which means we'll not be able to take phone calls tonight. So if you have any questions for Dr. Ray, make sure you put in a super chat and support the show. We'll put those comments on screen and read all those questions off to Dr. Ray. Dr. Ray, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I think we ought to make sure and charge Dave like double or triple next time for having skipped tonight. He's playing hooky on us, isn't he?
Well, he is. He's out of the country. Isn't that correct, Genevieve?
I believe so. I believe that is the case. So
well, then that's even worse. I mean, shoot, why didn't he take us with him?
Yeah.
Right? I would love to be out of the country right now.
I know. We'll charge him the exchange rate of
there you go.
He's in right now.
Good.
So, Dr. Ray, how you been? You're for those who don't know, founder of the Secular Therapy Project and recovering from religion. Is there anything you'd like to share about that before we get started?
Well, yeah, our subject tonight is mental health, and it's near and dear to my heart. And that is the main reason that I started recovering from religion and why I started Secular Therapy Project, because I saw terrible, terrible support for people who are leaving religion. And I saw so many psychologists, so many social workers and other therapists virtually denying that religion could be traumatic or religion could cause problems. So it just pissed me off to see highly qualified and licensed people who otherwise were probably good therapists, really not able to address the issues that many, many people experience when they leave religion. So our founding Recovering from Religion first was a peer support effort. And then after having the peer support take off and look so successful, I realized, we need to actually start getting the darn therapist on board too. So,
right.
So that's why I did the Secular Therapy. We can talk more about the details of that later if we want, but so that's where I'm coming from. Plus I'm a psychologist. I've been a psychologist. I started out as a clinical psychologist, then organizational psychologist. And now I'm kind of back to playing clinical, but I'm no longer licensed. I no longer practice officially. Let's just put it that way, but I'm sure doing a lot of this kind of stuff. So there you go.
Right. Well, I will say I can personally vouch for the Secular Therapy Project. I have found a therapist through there, which I could not be happier with, and has definitely, made an improvement and helped me a lot. So the Secular Therapy Project is a great resource because for us, it's at least I can't speak for you both, but it's been more difficult for me because I don't want to talk to a therapist that has a spiritual or religious background that wants to push that on me, because I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any of that. So I'd rather talk to someone that, uses science-based methods.
Yeah. Well, it just makes my day to hear you say you found a good therapist through the Secular Therapy Project. Whenever I go speak somewhere, inevitably somebody will come up to me after my talk and say, I just want to let you know I found a therapist at the Secular Therapy Project. And that just makes it all worthwhile. because those people, including you, could have ended up with some spiritual focused therapist that actually would cause more problems. I mean, they're not addressing the root cause, which is religious brainwashing and indoctrination and trauma.
Right. There's a couple super chats I want to get to. I got cookies. Hi, Dr. Ray. It's Jennifer from RFR. Great topic to cover.
Yeah, Jennifer, thank you.
I am just so happy, Jennifer, to finally know your name. I know you as the weekly I Got Cookies, and I'm glad you have cookies, and I'm also really glad to know your name.
Jennifer is one of our hardest working volunteers. I dare say there's probably not more than one or two other people that can keep up with her in all of RFR, unless it's me or Gail. She is everywhere, it seems like. And Jennifer, I'm sorry you're not on the line, but last week I told Jennifer that we're about ready to spring the. Remember, Ethan, when we did the big fundraiser?
Yes, I do.
We said, hey, we met our goal, but we want to go farther and put a billboard up. We're about ready to put that billboard up. We've decided, and Jennifer was the one that did the research on it. She really has a lot to do with it. And we just had all our volunteers vote this week on, I think we had 7 different possibilities. We narrowed it down to 3, and then we had our volunteers vote on which one they thought it should be. We're not sure quite where we're going to put it. Maybe somewhere like Houston or Huntsville, Alabama. We're not sure yet. But anyway, within a month or two, watch out. There might be an explosion around the billboard.
Well, for those that don't know, I've worked with Daryl the past 2 years. We did a fundraiser for Recovering from Religion last year, where we raised $8,000, and then this past year, Daryl was like, "Let's set it to $10,000," and I personally was like, "There's no way we can make that much money." And sure enough, we greatly surpassed it by a few $1,000s this past year. So we were able to get enough money for the billboard and the excursion. So it's really great that so many people are willing to donate, and you can donate still by going to recoveringfromreligion.org. It's a great organization.
Yep. Well, thank you, and we always appreciate everything that you've done for us.
We got another super chat from Greg Markowski, 1999. Thanks, Genevieve, Ethan, and fellow Kansas Citation Dr. Ray for the great show.
Kansas City, Ethan. We're Kansas City.
I'm sorry, I'm a little small on my phone. And then Tess N says, "I love being a part of RFR. I can listen to Daryl Ray for hours." I agree. I love talking to Daryl Ray. He has great insight and a great person to speak to.
Well, Tess is one of our big volunteers too. Hey, this is great. I love seeing our volunteers come in here. In fact, Tess kind of, anyway, I won't go into detail, but we have so many things that people can do at Recover from Religion as a volunteer. So if anybody here wants to volunteer, just go to the website and hit the volunteer button, and we'll find something for you to do. Because even if you don't like talking to human beings, maybe you're a computer kind of person, you want to talk to a computer, we can get you that. We can get you there.
Before we get started on a topic, we do have a question from Anton Gomez, a regular super chat. Thank you. Dr. Ray, do you think there is no value on marriage?
Well, I think marriage has many positive benefits. No, I think there's lots of value for it if that's what you choose.
Right.
What I think the problem is, and we've discussed this in other places, you and I, Ethan, is, are we on? I like this term, relationship escalator. Our culture says, well, you should date first, and go steady, then get engaged, and then you go up and up and up until you're married. And then you have kids, and keep going. Well, it's an escalator that our culture expects and pushes. Our parents push us, our grandparents push us, our neighbors, our friends, everybody pushes you to get on the relationship escalator. Well, what if you don't want to be on the relationship escalator? And if you refuse to get on the relationship escalator and you stay single and you don't partner up permanently with somebody for the rest of your life, you feel ostracized. You feel like you're not part of the greater culture, and the culture tends to put people down who don't follow the relationship escalator. So I am not against marriage. I'm against the culture forcing models on everybody. It's not a one size fits all. And there's different marriages. I mean, you could have just an old traditional marriage, or you could have an open marriage, or you could be a polyamorous person with some sort of marriage.
Right.
There are many models of marriage. There's not just one. The one this person, I'm not going to read their mind. I shouldn't. But what you're implying is that there's one model. No, I'm going to say there's lots of models. Our culture tries to convince us that there's only one model, though. So does that answer your question? Hopefully it does a little bit.
I think so.
I think it does. And it's funny. It's something that I've thought about quite a bit lately when it comes to all of the discussions that we have after the Roe v. Wade draft was leaked, and how we're talking about how, gay marriage is next. Well, it's interesting that the debate comes down to this idea that God says that marriage is between a man and a woman. And my response is, according to one religion, but what about the rest?
Yeah, right.
Marriage is not a Christian concept, and yet even in the secular nation, it seems like that's sort of largely what it's treated as.
It is.
In that culture, and by and large, marriage has sort of been a way of, transferring ownership of women from their fathers to their husbands.
Yep.
It has come with a lot of baggage, but just like you said, that is not the only way. So I am not anti-marriage. I am, as always, pro-choice. You are not less of a person for not being
pro-choice in multiple ways, right, Genevieve?
all the choices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Give us choices. That's what that's all we're saying.
Yeah.
My grandparents on both sides, and they lived a long time. I was fortunate to know all four of my grandparents. I think my first grandparent died when I was 30 years old. So I had a good deal of time with them. And those four grandparents, married to each other, of course, were four of the most miserable people I've ever known. They hated each other. And I never could figure out why they were married to each other. If they clearly didn't like each other, why did they stay married? But because the culture expected that. Nobody supposedly got divorced or separated or all that stuff. And so it occurred to me very early in my life that a 50-year life sentence, and that's really what they appear to be serving, a 50-year life sentence. Both of my grandparents exceeded 50 years in marriage. And they were, everybody had a big celebration and gave them a 50th wedding anniversary thing and all. Well, they acted happy, but all of us knew they were not. So what does it mean when you spend the majority of your adult life being miserable with another human being? I just do not understand that. I don't want to understand that. I don't want to participate in it.
Speaking from experience, I can say I was in a marriage where, neither of us were happy, and we essentially stayed married just because we thought that's what we were supposed to do. Because, getting divorced is of course morally wrong from a Christian perspective. You have to work through it. So it took us some time to be able to separate amicably and eventually get divorced.
Right.
Oh. Ethan, I did not know that you were also divorced. I was once married as well, but I was not for any sort of religious idea of, we must stay together. In my secular perspective, it was difficult to end solely because it started out with these rose-colored lenses, and you hold on to this idea, and then in the process, you don't tend to trust your rational brain of recognizing what is at the present and not this ideology that you have. And I think, speaking more broadly just about mental health and self-awareness, is that it can be really easy to lock yourself into this idea of how things should be, or if you're not happy, it's oftentimes, it must be because you're not trying hard enough, and maybe you should just try harder, and if you put in more effort, then things would be better for you. But that's just, in marriage and in life, that's largely not the case.
Small funny tidbit. I went into my marriage a Christian hardcore Republican, and I came out of it an atheist liberal.
I love
That's
that
what
journey
happens.
for you.
That's what happens when you start seeing there's more choices than the narrow number that you get from religion. That's the downside. Religion is preaches and pushes a one size fits all. And when you take a human brain and cram it into a one size fits all, that itself will lead to mental health issues. And I think I've seen so many times people in bad marriages become depressed, and they can't blame the marriage on the depression because they were always taught that, well, marriage is the height of, the best thing that could ever happen to you.
Right.
Well, if it's the best thing, how can it make you depressed? But it certainly can. And I want to throw out something. I'll bet a lot of people have never heard this before. I know we're talking about mental health, but I'll tie this all back together here, if you will. The word satiation. Are you familiar with that word, either one of you?
Is it related to the word satiated?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Absolutely. So just imagine if I said, "Hey guys, we're gonna give you free steak for the rest of your life, and that's all you can eat. We will give you a free steak every meal of your life for the rest of your life." How long would it take for you to get sick and tired of steak? And if you're a vegan or vegetarian, we'll, just change it to lettuce or something. I don't know. You would get sick and tired of it really quickly. And that's called satiation. You're sated. You're full of it. You don't want any more of it. Your body will respond negatively even around it. Well, that's what happens in many, many relationships. People get satiated with each other. And when they get satiated, they then, instead of being pulled together and attracted, they get pushed apart and, distracted with each other, I guess, disattracted. So they're being pushed apart where, 5 years ago, we couldn't keep our hands off of each other. And now we're fighting every day over the smallest things. Well, that's a pretty darn good sign that one or both people are moving towards some kind of mental health issue. Mm-hmm. That is not a healthy place to be. And so I don't know how we got off of this subject so quickly. I guess it was from the question, wasn't it? But it's a good question because now it leads us to think, where do mental health problems come from? And many, many times it comes from relationships that we're not managing well.
So, we definitely got to move on to, the topic at hand, mental health and religion. But we do have a question that's slightly off topic. Greg Markarski, thanks for the super chat. Hate to agree with the GOP regarding the mass shootings. It does have a lot to do with mental health. Now what, GOP? Doubt they'd like my solution. Daryl, what solutions do you see? I'm assuming he's referring to what solutions you see to minimize the mass shootings.
Yeah, and also Daryl, before you answer that, I do just want to put a little asterisk, Greg. Thanks for upping the $19.99 to a $29.98. You're the best. But I want it to be clear that in my views that the GOP can say that it all has to do with mental health, but they're not saying that because they think that we need to tackle mental health. They're just saying that because they don't want to talk about guns. If they truly believed that it was a mental health crisis that was in need of addressing, then they wouldn't defund mental health access across the board. So with that out of the way, so I don't just stew in that, please, Daryl, what do you have to say? How do we?
Well, I'm going to say I 1,072% agree with what you just said. So there you go. And there is no serious mental health professional that's backing anything up that the GOP says. No, there's no serious mental health. I'm sure they can find some charlatan like Dr. Oz or somebody. There's always somebody that'll say what they want. But the mental health community is not seeing a problem. That is not the source of all this. And all you have to do is just a little bit of comparative anthropology or comparative sociology and look at how many guns does Switzerland have. It has about as many as we have per person, and yet they have high controls over it. People are required to do lots of training. There's lots of things around their guns, everything we don't have. And then if you look at other countries, Canada, you have Canada, Australia, you have one incident and the entire country changes and starts slamming down, and then there's no more incidents. Right. Isn't it interesting that Australia and Canada have had virtually no mass shootings since they clamped down on the use of AR-15s and things like that. So it's a simple answer to this person. Simple answer is control guns. Don't let 19-year-olds go in and buy a gun.
Right.
Don't let anybody carry a gun in public. Don't let anybody have a gun that isn't required to at least show the same level of competence that they do to drive their car. Why do we require licenses of car drivers, but we don't require a license of gun owners? And you have to pass a test. You have to have proficiency. There's lots of things we could be doing, and we're not. We already did it back in the 90s. I know you may not be able to remember. We actually had a gun control, a very weak gun control under the Clinton administration, and it was obviously effective until the Republicans came along under Newt Gingrich and trashed it, and then we saw an increase in mass murders again. So it's pretty straightforward. Yeah. It's not a hard thing to solve. Every country on this planet solved it except us.
So last question on this topic. What do you say to the people that say we need more guns on the street because there's always a good guy with a gun that will stop the bad guy with the gun?
You're
stirring right now.
I am.
You can make all the claims you want, but there's no evidence for it. So
yeah. The evidence is on the contrary. I believe that there was a comprehensive study done looking at all the incidents of mass shootings and violence from 2001 to 2013, and they found that less than 3% of these incidents actually ended because there was a good guy with a gun. And we've in fact seen that when you are in a situation like this, where there is a rogue shooter and you have your gun and you pull it out, sometimes the cops show up. And how are they going to distinguish who was a good guy with a gun or a bad guy with a gun?
Right.
It's largely it's a bullshit talking point that doesn't actually have any skin.
And if you're a black person carrying a gun in that kind of situation, they're more likely to shoot you if you're in the process of trying to defend or help solve the problem. It's a stupid solution.
In that case, you can just take the gun out of the equation, because if you're unarmed, they will do the same thing.
Yeah.
If you are a legal carrier and you are trying to show them your card to show that you can have your gun and letting them know where it is and following all the rules, still not going to happen. But I won't go down that rabbit hole. To go back to this idea of where mental health does fit into this equation, I would be curious, Daryl, to hear your thoughts on this idea that I've had around what we've seen with mass shootings and how it does relate to mental health. It's just like how they say, the GOP loves to say that it's a mental health crisis and that we need to stop bullying. If bullying was really the issue, then I think that the mass shooters that we would have on our hands would be LGBTQ kids and people of color and women and all of these other people who are actually dealing with oppression. But instead, what we see is that the typical mass shooter is a young white man between the ages of 17 and 20, tends to be an outcast, tends to be fairly misogynistic, and has like a certain hate of women. And I think that if I could generalize all of them, it broadly seems like it's a combination of mental health plus entitlement.
There's no if you did the correlations, it's remarkable how many white males between those age ranges there are. It's rare to have anybody outside those range. I mean, the Las Vegas one, for example, that guy was in his 50s, I believe, and that was super unusual. I mean, so unusual, I don't think we've ever seen anybody else hardly. So the age range and white males that's the real issue right there. And it's entitlement, it's misogynistic structures in our society. Yeah, if you want to work in mental health, let's work on the mental health of incel, misogynistic white males.
And to kind of go back largely to the topic of this show in general, why is it that they feel this entitlement? Why is it that they feel like they have been wronged by society and that they are entitled to be in a position where, I don't know, they don't feel the need to lash out and shoot a bunch of people?
Remember, many of these have manifestos. They oftentimes write. The Buffalo guy had a manifesto. You see a lot of them do. I don't know about this guy yet, but they oftentimes sit down and spend hours, days, hundreds of hours maybe writing these long manifestos. And if you look at them closely, they're basically white, racist, virtually Nazi kinds of ideologies around supremacy of the race, supremacy of the gender. That is not necessarily a mental health issue, because if you look at it, we had an entire nation called Germany that bought into that, quote, mental health issue and believed that white males were the most superior. All white German males were more superior to everybody else on the planet. And we're seeing a reiteration of that in some ways in the ideology coming out of Russia with Putin. It's just a nationalistic ideology with the flavor of white supremacy. And it's not mental health. It's indoctrination. It's brainwashing. Just like you can get, if you brainwash people enough in a particular religion, you can get them to go fight against other religions in the name of your religion. I mean, that's what the whole Crusades were. There was no mental health issue there. It was a cultural expectation to go fight for your religion. And, so we don't want to mix up what culture does to us versus what mental health really is. And I hear the cop of course, they don't want to talk about any of this. They just want to blame it on anybody except the guns that, gun rights people.
Yeah. It's the doors and the fire codes. But
yeah.
That is really sort of one of the tragedies that we, the secondary tragedy that we see every single time that this happens, is that when they come out and say that, oh, this is a mental health crisis, then suddenly we're just further stigmatizing mental illness, which by and large, people who are dealing with mental health issues are not going to go and shoot up a school or do anything crazy like that.
What I'm more concerned about, and you really never hear the cop talk about this, I'm more concerned about the mental health of all the people, the families, the children, the teachers, not the ones that were killed. I mean, they have no mental health anymore, of course, but all the entire social network around that school and the families, that is going to be a massive mental health challenge.
Absolutely.
Those people are going to be experience trauma in the same way that a child in Ukraine right now is experiencing trauma when a bomb goes off next to their house, or 50 rockets land around their school. It's the same kind of trauma. And the GOP doesn't seem to understand, or gun rights people seem to have no care whether children in a school are getting traumatized, and teachers and parents in the same way that Ukrainian teachers and parents and children are being traumatized. This is really not much different. If you think about what if a soldier came into your school in Ukraine and started shooting people? Well, that's just kind of what we're seeing here.
Mm-hmm. I can't fathom what would be going through a child's mind hiding from an active shooter. Like, that's got to be horrifying, and the trauma they're going to have to deal with years to come.
Yeah, right.
It's terrible.
We're dealing with. I saw a reporter. I don't think a reporter realized what they were saying. They were reporting on the refugees coming out of Ukraine. They're lining up, getting on buses, and getting out of one of the cities. This is a month or so ago, and the reporter said, and it's so strange because so many of these people have stopped talking. The reporter, I don't think the reporter didn't tie that to mental health. But when you see somebody so traumatized that they stop talking, that's a clear sign of PTSD. Mm-hmm. They just shut down. Right. Well, that's what we're going to see at these children. That's what we may see at some of the parents, some of the teachers. They're just going to shut down. And who is going to help them deal with the mental health? It ain't the GOP, I'll tell you that. So, they're not concerned about mental health.
That's because, the God's not going to listen, but that's why there's the God. It's thoughts and prayers. It'll fix everything.
Thoughts and prayers will fix your mental health.
I read a really tragic story today, reporting on a mother of a survivor from the Uvalde shooting, and her child was obviously dealing with a bunch of trauma, screaming and crying and sleeping with mom and dad every night. But this mother doesn't actually get, paid family leave because she's a part-time employee, and so she cannot be there for her child. And it's frustrating, I do want to say that when we talk about why this only happens in America, yes, it's because we've got an epic shit ton of guns. But we also don't have universal health care. We don't have living wages. We don't have we don't have a robust social safety net to make people feel secure.
No.
I think that oftentimes the people who do crack under pressure are more likely, 99% of the time, they're going to turn that gun on themselves. And that's just sort of the reality. But we cannot separate, I think that we can't separate mental health from access to housing, access to security, access to a consistent community that is not on the rocks. It's a tough situation to fix.
I was glad to talk about mental health tonight because there's several pieces I'd like to throw into this, and that was, and we jumped right into it practically. I think what I'm seeing in people that I have to interact with, is a lot of people are responding and reacting and having their mental health impacted by current events. There's absolutely no doubt that the war in Ukraine is incredibly distracting and disturbing, especially, when somebody like Putin comes out and say, I'm going to, start using nuclear weapons or something. That's got us into anxiety. And we're probably seeing it we're probably not seeing it as above board yet, but get a month or two, we might start seeing more of it. And then, of course, we get school shootings. We get the Buffalo shooting. All these things are in our environment, and our emotional, our brains are being bombarded with these tragedies. And it's hard for the human brain to fathom this. As human beings, our brains are not designed, and I don't mean this in a God design way. Our brains are not designed to deal with this level of constant stimulation. Think about if you were living in a little village as a peasant in France in the 1500s, you might have to deal with one trauma or two traumas in your life. And it may be bad. I'm not saying they weren't bad, but life was different. It was slower. There was less impact. The wars are not going to come through except every 100 years, maybe. And the Inquisition only happened maybe once in your community. I don't know.
Question for you, to kind of really get started on the religion and mental health. Could you explain a little bit about and what religious trauma syndrome is?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do not use the word syndrome in that context. I know Dr. Renee Winnell does, and we've got a slight difference of opinion on this. So let me go back and say I will talk about religious trauma all day long, but I'm hesitant to talk about religious trauma syndrome for the reason that a syndrome is a clearly identified set of symptoms that come together consistently. You can use those symptoms. If we look at a medical syndrome, you look at all the different symptoms, and then those 5 or 6 symptoms come together to give you a diagnosis of smallpox or whatever you got. Hopefully not smallpox. I think we got rid of that one. So with that said, religion, we know in the psychological and diagnostic atmosphere of our current time, we know a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Everybody's heard those terms, whether they know what it means exactly or not. but we've got a cluster of symptoms that, for example, soldiers coming out of Iraq or soldiers coming out of Afghanistan, you can see them behaving in certain ways that are not they're not natural or normal within our culture. However, they would have been quite natural and normal in Afghanistan. You hear an explosion, you hit the ground. That's pretty normal in Afghanistan. In fact, you won't have a head if you don't do that. But coming here and hearing a firework, for example, or hearing a car backfire and hitting the ground is not normal. So that's just one example. So we know that there are symptoms of that are based in our behavior that we can identify. And the U.S. Army, the U.S. military put a lot of money and time into figuring this out because somebody finally got tired of having soldiers come back and spending the rest of their lives dealing with the consequences of the war. In the Civil War, it was called soldier's heart. That was the name of the condition. In World War I, they called it shell shock. In World War II, they called it battle fatigue. And we had names for this. We didn't have any treatment for it. And we didn't understand the symptoms. So we know now the symptoms of trauma. And we know that trauma comes from many different areas. I'm going to get to your question here in a minute, but I think I need to have this background here, Ethan. We know what trauma is. We've got treatments for trauma. We know what it looks like symptomatically with a soldier. We also have studied it pretty closely. And if people want to go look at it, they can go online and take a little test called the Adverse Childhood Experiences test. Just go on, just Google it and go take the test. It was created by the Center for Disease Control. And you can just take this simple 10-item questionnaire, and it'll help you understand if you had an adverse childhood experience. Now, just because you had, for example, maybe you had a babysitter that beat the crap out of you and nobody knew about it, or sexually abused you or something, that could lead to a traumatic response. And it would be perfectly normal for you to want to go hide when that babysitter comes. But if that behavior leads you to hide anytime somebody who looks like that babysitter is around you, that would be a bit abnormal. So with all that, we can say we know what trauma looks like in children. We know what it looks like in soldiers. Now, Dr. Marlene Winnell came along and said, this trauma that I'm seeing, the trauma she was seeing in her practice looks a lot like other trauma she had seen. And so she started putting all this together and say, the root of the trauma in my patients is religion. Why don't we call it what it is? Religious trauma. Now, the reason I don't go as far as to put the syndrome on it is because I don't think there's been enough research to put the cluster of symptoms. And I do think that different religions create enough different symptoms that it might be hard to cluster them all together. We may eventually land on 6, 7, or 8 symptoms. For example, I mentioned earlier the fact that people aren't talking. People who were verbal and now all of a sudden they've just shut down. That would be a symptom within the cluster of the trauma, the trauma syndrome. So I'm happy to use syndrome maybe in 5 years, but right now I still think the research is out. I don't know. So how much do you want to talk about the specifics of it? Because I'll go in detail if you want, but I wanted to back that up with everything. You want me to keep talking?
Oh, yeah, please.
Okay. Well, I don't want to dominate the conversation here.
No,
you are here to dominate.
You are. You're the expert. I can dominate in this area, so please ramble away.
All right. Well, I will ramble on. Let me get a drink here. So some of the symptoms that we see, and as within recovery from religion, we see these literally every day. I was looking at our top list of issues that come to us. Number one issue is fear of hell. It's like number one in our list of things. Well, if somebody can't sleep, if they can't get the thought of fear of hell out of their mind, if they can't concentrate, if everything seems to that thought process disrupts their life, then that's a pretty good sign that there's trauma, that the fear of hell has caused a thought disorder for this person. when you're 3, 4, 5 years old, and you get told that if you don't mind your mother, you're going to hell. And oh, by the way, people get burned in hell. And watch what happens when I spank you. That's only a part of what the devil's going to do to you. I speak from experience because that's what my own grandmother did. So this is not theoretical with me, although I don't think I was traumatized by it. I do know people. I didn't get beaten, within an inch of my life like some people were. I got a good switching occasionally, and I did not deserve it, but that's okay. That's my grandmother. So that's a clear sign. The fear of hell. Other things are relationship issues, that people have trouble establishing relationships, trusting people, trusting themselves, being able to trust their own judgment. There's a lot of things that underlie the indoctrination, the religion. Religion's always preaching that you are broken, you are useless, you are powerless, you can't do anything without Jesus or God or Allah or, whatever. And if you buy into that at 4, 5, 6 years old, it is embedded in your brain for the long haul. And it may be really difficult for you to reprogram your brain. I'm not saying it can't be done. I know it can be done. And we've got great treatment methods for doing it. It's still not something you're going to do on your own. And that's why we're talking about mental health today, because if you're having a mental health challenge, it ain't something you can cure yourself any more than you can cure your own broken leg. You probably need somebody who knows what the hell they're doing, and you need to go find a mental health professional. And you need to find a mental health professional that understands religious trauma specifically. And we've got a few of those within the Secular Therapy Project. I will stop my rant. Genevieve gave me permission to rant today, so I'm just going on.
Daryl, like I said, I am a simpleton who does a show every single week. Ethan is the genius behind the camera and all of the works, but you are the one and only Daryl Ray, and so of course I'd want to hear you far more than I want to hear myself.
Absolutely, I can agree with Genevieve.
Ethan, I love to hear you too, because it is usually only in the before and the after. So I'm just side note, Ethan, so glad you're here. Back to the conversation though. I have been, I was born and raised basically as an atheist. Religion was not part of my life, but then for years I've been part of a lot of ex-Christian groups, just because I feel like I can often assuage some of those, not to the extent that an actual mental health professional can, but I've noticed that I can sort of assuage these fears of hell, or these fears, not even specifically about hell, but just the unknown of an afterlife, of like, oh, how can you survive or live on thinking that this is all that there is? And I'm just like, hi, I try to just be a friendly face that is here to say, hey, yeah, it's hard. I'm really sorry, but I've never had any of that, and this is sort of how I cope. So if you can sort of put yourself in this idea of a blank slate, and by and large, what I do see, the last thing to go for people who are deconstructing their faith is that fear of eternal torture. I wonder why. That's a terribly traumatic thing that we should not be teaching children, but
not at all.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing that has surprised me, though, when it comes to talking about the church, and in particular more fundamentalist sects and mental health, is that I have had friends who have told me that their church didn't believe that mental health issues existed. They didn't believe that anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, no, those don't exist. That is either A, demons possessing you, or B, proof that you don't love Jesus enough. And that breaks my heart. Even on a TikTok video that I made months ago, somebody had told me that anybody who has to take medication for their mental health clearly is in need of Jesus.
Oh God.
And they said that because I was alluding to my own medication, which is for my ADHD, which is not an SSRI or what have you. But it's
Right.
just, it has been the most shocking for me as somebody who grew up away from this entire culture to see how many people are sort of robbed of these opportunities for real help and real acceptance and real guidance, and instead are given
Mhm.
Bible verses. To turn that into a question, I don't know. What do you think? Am I crazy for thinking that this is insane?
Well,
Sorry.
let me just say I wrote a whole book on that kind of thing.
Yes.
No, you're not crazy. Obviously, what religion does what religion is so good at is finding our weak spots and then taking advantage of those weak spots. So if I can find out, that you have a certain, let's say you're born, I mean, with a proclivity or a tendency towards anxiety. Religion can take that anxiety and really turn it loose on you, by saying, you're going to go to hell or whatever, whatever that. I mean, Mormons have a different version of this issue than they don't have hell, for example, but they do have other punishments or so-called ideas. So religion's going to take your weak spot and turn it against you. And it does that over and over again. I mentioned the fear of hell was the first thing on our list. I just brought the list up. And second on our list was sex and sexuality. Is that a surprise to anybody?
No.
Not at all.
Not at all. So those are the top two things. And of course, the third thing on our list is LGBTQ issues, of people calling in and talk to us about. So the religion knows that fear of your own body, fear of your own sexuality is a great handle for religion to grab and then manipulate you with that. So that's why religions and religions have just learned this. There's no, I'm not a conspiracy theorist or any of that bullshit. It's an evolution. It's like evolution in biology. Religions find what works and then do more of it. But just like I got birds in my bird feeder out there. They find the bird seed and they keep doing it until the bird seed's gone. Then they go find another bird feeder probably somewhere. If my bird feeder is empty, they'll go find some other place to find seeds. Well, that's the way religions are. Religions find what gets them more adherents and what gives them more money. What gives them more brains? Because religions are in the business of collecting brains. I mean, think about that. If I can't get my religion into your brain, then my religion's going to die. So religions are really good at infecting us like a virus does, like COVID does. If I sneeze on you, I might give you COVID. When the Jehovah's Witnesses knock on your door, they're trying to sneeze on you to give you Jehovah's Witnesses. Same thing for Mormons. When a Baptist gives you a chick pamphlet, same thing. So religions are they're just diseases that get passed from brain to brain. And that's what's going on in this. What you got there, Genevieve?
Oh, I was just, as soon as you said a chick pamphlet, I
Oh,
I threw like 30 of these away when I went hiking a couple weeks ago. They were in a remote bathroom, and it's a really bad story. But I bring this up because I think it is hilarious. But I also think that you are right. I also have my own theory that I kind of would love to bounce off of you, because I don't know if it necessarily goes back to entirely this need for it to spread by converting other people, because we do have religions that actively shy away from converting people. Like largely Judaism is a closed practice. You're not going to have a bunch of Jews knocking on your door to tell you to convert. They make it actually quite difficult to do so. What I think though is that regardless of the religion, unless your belief is grounded in this idea that everybody is equal and everybody has the right to exist as they are and everybody is valid regardless of what they choose to believe or not to believe, then if you find yourself living in a community in which your religion or faith belief is the majority, then you're going to find yourself become part of the oppressors. You're going to find that if you can just have power over another people, it has nothing to do necessarily with the fact that they didn't convert to believe what you did. It's just the fact that they're not part of your in-group. And in some cases, in a close practice, they might never be. And I think that's kind of why we have Buddhist terrorists, which is, it seems like an oxymoron, but that's just kind of the reality. So I'm trying to
There
expand
are,
this
yeah.
idea. Yeah. So I wonder.
I do.
No, please.
Well, you've hit upon a key component, because, and I explore this in great detail in the book. There's vertical transmission and there's horizontal transmission. Judaism focuses on vertical transmission from parent to child, whereas evangelical Christians, for example, they do vertical transmission, but they also do horizontal transmission. And if you think about, there's diseases like that. There's diseases that you get, biological diseases that you can get from your parents.
Hereditary versus communicable.
Exactly. Or even non-hereditary, but let's just say that the mother has syphilis and the baby, and being born through the birth canal, gets the syphilitic bacteria, or something like that. So that would be a vertical transmission. So it's important to realize that each religion has its own strategies for survival. And some religions are more successful than others. Just like, we had a pandemic of COVID, but now we're seeing monkeypox. It's not going to become a pandemic because it spreads very differently, and it doesn't have nearly the vector. The vectors can't transmit the disease nearly as easily. So, I mean, if I just sneeze, I can give COVID to 15 people in one room. You can't do that apparently with monkeypox, and you couldn't do it with other kinds of diseases. So if you just keep the notion of religion as a mental meme, a mental control mechanism that wants to go from my brain to yours, and look at it with the disease model in mind, you'll see that it fits very closely to the way a virus or other parasites work. Very much I almost call the book the God Parasite, because I almost think the parasite fits better, but I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just a model. It's just a metaphor. I don't want anybody to get mad at me for saying religion is not a disease, because I'm not saying that. I'm saying it spreads like a disease.
Right.
It's a big difference.
It's a damn good one, and I would almost want to say that in this nation, it often feels a bit more like a bacteria that is resistant to antibiotics.
There you go.
Because no matter what we do, no matter what situations we find ourselves in, it seems like it is something that we cannot address ever.
Very difficult. I agree. So, I do want to address the issue that religion is not a mental illness. I see people making that claim.
It drives me nuts. And I see, unfortunately, atheists perpetrate this. Some atheists perpetrate this, that religion is a mental illness. How do you deal with those people?
Well, I don't deal with them. I just talk back to them. I don't deal with them. They're oftentimes unconvincible. But the fact is, religion, while it has similarities to disease, as we've already discussed, it is not a mental illness. You can have perfectly healthy, perfectly normal, perfectly mentally healthy people that still are Catholics, that still are Episcopalians or Jewish. Mm-hmm. So there's throughout history, it's just been a part of our culture. So if you're taught you're taught as a Baptist your whole life, and that's all you know, and you grow up being a devout Baptist, then you're just a devout Baptist, just like you might be a devout Republican, or just like you might be a devout Chevy owner. My grandfather wouldn't own anything but a Chevy. So does he have a mental illness around Chevys? Maybe. I'm a Ford guy. No, I'm kidding. So, I mean, you could take almost anything and turn that into, or call it a mental illness, and it's not. So let's treat mental illness for what it is. It is a dysfunction of that particular person within the environment that they are currently living in. I guarantee you, if I pulled Ethan out of North America and put him in the middle of the Amazonian forest to live alone in a hunter-gatherer tribe, they would think he's mentally ill. If you put me there, you would think I'm mentally ill, because I would just not fit into that environment. It would just be so dysfunctional. I couldn't live there. I would die probably. Well, that's what we're seeing here. People who have a mental illness are having trouble adjusting to the environment that they're in. And sometimes it's a damn environment's problem. I mean, if you're in an abusive household and you're dealing with constant threats of hell or punishment, or being forced to read Bible verses you don't believe in, it's going to take a toll on you. The environment itself can start hurting you in a way that your brain starts simply defending itself. And in defending itself, you may act out and do things that hurt you even more. So that's the way to look at what we're seeing here.
Okay. So I'd like to get to an audience question. Anton Gomez, thank you for the $75 super chat. Some people don't seek therapy because they're trapped in a vicious cycle of not considering mental health worthy. Thoughts?
Oh, man, I'm going to tell you. How much did he pay us to answer that question? Because he is right on target.
75 pesos.
Mexican
Thank
dollars.
you. Well, I'm going to try and give him the $75 answer, because that is an excellent question. And didn't I tell you, Genevieve, before we started the show, I want to talk about that very thing. So here's what I like to help people think about is, what is the cost benefit of dealing with mental health issues? And so many people go through life, having failed relationship after failed relationship, losing job after job, getting injuries, getting in car wrecks, getting drug addicted or something like that. And they never trace it back to, what's this costing me in my life? Are all these are not all accidents. If you put the pattern together, okay, I've had 3 failed marriages, or I've that would be one example. Then maybe by the third one, I ought to start thinking maybe it's got something to do with my mental health, not all the people I've chosen to marry. So people do get deluded into thinking it's not their problem, and so they avoid the notion that I need some mental health care. I think it's important to think, how many jobs have you lost because of your mental condition? If you can't get to work on time, if you can't focus, you can't get your school assignments in on time, and you fail in courses, after a while, the pattern becomes obvious to an outsider. But to you, it's harder for you to see it. It's really hard for us to see our own patterns a lot of times. But I just like to help clients realize that if you're unhappy in your life right now, look at what part of it are you responsible for. And you may find that there's a pattern that tells you you've got a mental health issue, and you need to go find somebody to help you with it, because you're obviously not getting it yourself. I don't think every problem in life needs a therapist. Do not hear me saying that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of problems that we can solve ourselves. But religion tells you you've got to solve all your problems yourself. Pray harder, listen to Jesus, whatever the bullshit is. And so we end up getting this habit of saying, I cannot ask for help. And I see a lot of guys doing this. I think men are worse at it than women many times. I think women are quicker to ask for help from each other and from professionals than men are. And I really wish we would get over this stupid idea that we got to do everything ourselves. So.
That's like the conservative side in me. That's how I was raised. Is don't be weak. Men tough it out. Real men don't talk about their problems. They just suck it up and get through it. So that's been one of my struggles with seeking mental health therapy, is always feeling like I'm just complaining or moaning and groaning and feeling like I'm weak for needing to talk to somebody. And it's definitely been a struggle trying to get past that.
It is, because your brain wants to say, no, you can't do that. I mean, you're actually you got a program, and it's a program that's going off in your mind that was put in there when you were 10, 12, 18 years old. And you're literally having to reprogram it. Well, here's the good news. A good therapist can help you reprogram your brain. You think, what's going on inside here right now as I'm talking? It's just a computer, an incredibly sophisticated computer. I mean, super sophisticated compared to any computer we've got today. It's still more than anything we've got, but it still needs to be programmed. And that's what we do. When we're raising children, we help them program their brains. Unfortunately, we sometimes help them program their brains wrong, and religion does a great job of that. And that's what you're fighting, Ethan, is your own brain programming. And that's why I'm glad you got a good therapist, because that there's going to help you reprogram.
Mm-hmm.
Me too. And if you need a good therapist, go to the Secular Therapy Project, where you can find a great secular therapist, as I have found.
Yes, it's so important. It's one of the, from a secular perspective, I think that, it seems like these are issues that literally anybody could deal with, but it does feel like growing up in a society or in a family that tells you that if you don't listen to me, then you are literally going to be tortured for all of eternity, for infinity. Kind of gives you like a leg up on the competition of who is going to deal with trauma. But something that I've noticed in my personal journey, which has been entirely secular from the get-go, is that sometimes it can be challenging to heal from mental health issues, and it can be challenging to move forward, because if you have dealt with these issues for your entire life, where you do not remember a time when you did not have anxiety, if you were like me, you're an anxious 3-year-old, then feeling quote unquote normal, feeling healthy, feels very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And that is it is such a shame how it feels like that in and of itself kind of impedes people's ability to find that stability.
Yeah, what you both are describing are just the programs that go off to help people keep indoctrinated in the religion or in the cultural norms, quote norms of around mental health. I noticed one of our chatters said something. They're stuck in the 1950 mentality about mental health, that you got to be totally insane to need help. And I'm sorry to hear that, but I am not totally insane. In fact, I don't know what totally insane means. But I will say this: I'm a psychologist, and I realized I am the worst person to go to is myself. I may be a damn good psychologist for Ethan or Genevieve, but I'm not a good psychologist for Daryl. I don't know if you ever heard that that old saying, a lawyer who defends himself has a fool for a client. Have you ever heard that one?
I have not.
But
Well,
it's very appropriate.
Yeah, it's a true. I mean, it's lawyers know what I mean. If somebody's a lawyer listening, well, a psychologist who does psychology on themselves is a fool for a client too. It's that simple. So when I got divorced the first time, I realized this is hitting me harder than I ever expected. I knew the signs of depression. I knew the signs of perseveration and thought disorders. I could see it in myself. And I said, well, I can either grin it and bear it and stick it out, or I can go see a therapist. And so I did. And I'm telling you, it was amazing how quickly I moved on. Now, I still had to go through the grief and the loss process. That's what you do normally. But there were aspects of that I did not have to go through, or I didn't have to go through it for 6 months or 6 years. I see people out there that are still pissed 6, 8 years after their divorce, are still pissed at their first, at their ex, and they're, if you ever spend 5 minutes in a coffee shop with them having a coffee, their ex is going to come up. They haven't seen their ex in 5 years, or they've been divorced in 7 years, and their brain is focused just on their ex. That is a mental health issue. Go get some fucking help about that. And I saw that in myself. I went and got help, and I'm glad I did. I think it saved me about 2 years of of unproductive life, unhappy life. I was still unhappy. I was still struggling with some stuff, but I struggled for 6 months rather than 2 years. And that's the cost benefit that I want to emphasize to our listeners. Take stock of how much, at the time I had my own practice. Do you want to go to a psychologist who's depressed themselves? Probably not.
No.
And you probably wouldn't know I'm depressed, but I'm probably not going to perform as good as I could. And it was going to hurt me. It was going to hurt my clients. It was going to hurt my business. So I had to sit down and say, look, how much is this costing me to stay in this depression, to stay mad at my ex spouse, or whatever else the issues are. And I said, people complain to me all the time, Genevieve, Ethan, about, I can't afford therapy. I probably hear that more than anything. And
I mean, if I didn't have insurance, I wouldn't be able to afford therapy. That's for sure. It's the insurance that, allows it to happen.
Yes, I'm going to disagree and agree. Yes, I understand. I understand. The other side of the coin is how much are you going to pay in lost wages, loss of jobs, loss of relationships, unhappiness day in and out, not being able to sleep, thought disorders. How much are you paying? If you could put a dollar figure on that.
That's true.
So let's say that's costing you $500 a month in misery. I mean, put a dollar figure on your misery. Isn't it worth, even if you have to cut some money out of your food bill? I mean, I'm not saying people should starve or anything. I'm just saying reprioritize your budget so you can go get at least one therapy session every 2 weeks. And I guarantee it's worth the money. It's worth the time. I am not here to shill for therapists. I don't get a cut in anything. I'm just saying, why be miserable for 6 years over something when you could be miserable for 6 months, but get over it quicker? That's what I'm trying to say. Do a cost benefit analysis. Just be brutal about it. It's a dollar and cents thing. If you lose your job because you're depressed, it's going to cost you a lot more than $500 a month.
Oh, that's an excellent perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're 100% right. I go back to this idea that living wages and affordable healthcare and affordable housing are also integral to the mental health crisis, because you are 1,000% right. It is always a great idea that you should always invest in yourself. It is always worth the money, because the years and the agony and the pain that you are going to lose not dealing with this is going to be insurmountable. But I know that in personal experience, it's difficult to justify saying that to somebody when, they don't have $120 that they can cut from their budget. And that's
right.
That's a sad reality of the country that we're living in now.
Right.
I totally agree. We got a screwed up system. I'm not disagreeing there.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to preach to somebody who's much poorer than I am or was even at that time. Poverty is real, and lack of social support systems is real. But if you can possibly do it, don't fool yourself into thinking I can grin and bear this, I can get through it myself, and then find out you just lost your job because you aren't performing your job.
So I just saw a second ago, Rick Manellis, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, asked a really interesting question. What about saving money by working with a supervised student therapist? I know that I save a bunch of money getting my hair cut and my teeth cleaned by going to students who are supervised. Does that exist for therapists? Are there schools where you can be seen by a therapist in training at a lower cost?
Yeah, I was in my internship. I was seeing people. I wasn't getting paid for it. I mean, I was seeing clients, and they were paying a nominal fee maybe to the organization. It was Vanderbilt University Counseling Center. So they were paying probably back then maybe $10. This is 1970, so it's a long time ago. But yeah, there are exactly those kind of places. And the second thing is, not everybody will do this, but many therapists will cut their rate if you pay in cash, they might also cut the rate towards a sliding scale. If you could say, I made $20,000 last year and I've got a kid, they might say, well, I'll only charge you $50 an hour or something. I can't make their rates for them. They have to make their own. And you always got to remember, they spent 8 years getting their degree. They went through hell. They weren't getting paid that whole time. They have a huge cost to become a good counselor. And counselors aren't making a mint. You think, oh, he's getting paid $120, $150 an hour. That is not going to make you a millionaire. I'll guarantee you that. It'll put food on the table, but it's not going to pay your student loans back. I mean, there's a lot of things you got to remember. It's like going to your doctor. You don't begrudge the money that you have to pay them or your dentist because they went to school for 8 years to get there. Well, your therapist is the same thing. So anyway, ask a therapist for, maybe he or she'll cut their rates. Maybe they got a sliding scale. Maybe they'll take cash cut the rate for cash. Anyway. Yeah. So anyway, thanks, Genevieve. That's a good question.
Are these student therapy sessions supervised? Or do they occasionally sit in on them? Like, how are they managed?
Well, different schools do it in different ways. The model that my university did was I had a tape recorder, and the client agreed for the session to be tape recorded. So the client would come in, we would sit down, and I would make sure they were okay with recording, and then I would hit the record button. And then at the end of the session, I would hand my tape in to my supervisor. And then my supervisor probably didn't listen to all my tapes, but they would listen to a sampling. Or if I say, be sure and listen to this one, because I don't know if I did a very good job here or I need some help. Then I had a great woman as a supervisor. She was just amazing. And she would listen to it. And then we would have our, usually a couple hours per week, we would sit down and we would go over in a great deal of detail, at least a couple of my sessions. And I would get lots of ideas from her. I'd be taking notes. And then next time I met with that client, I would take those ideas into that client. Also, we would role play. My supervisor and I would role play those very issues. She would have listened to the tape, and then she would say, let me role play that with you and try this technique or try that technique, or let me demonstrate this technique. And so, yeah, that's the way it works. You're getting good quality mental health. And of course, they're going to make mistakes because they're students, right. They're new, but it's a good experience for them, and it's going to help you. And you're getting paid you're paying a whole lot less for that service than what you would otherwise. Yeah. So does that answer the question, you think?
Yeah,
I think so.
I can't guarantee that everybody does it that way, but that's the way I did
it. Genevieve, we actually have a super chat question for you. Jen, thank you, Courageous. That mom,
hey, Courageous, how you doing?
And be there for a kid who survived the shooting. Is there a GoFundMe for that family and the other survivors?
I don't know about a GoFundMe for that particular woman. I am sure there is. I will DM you and share that, and if I find it, I will also put it in the comments of this YouTube video. But I do know that there is an abundance of GoFundMes for multiple families and victims of the Uvalde shooting. So absolutely, please go donate. It's really fucked up. And then also make sure that you're registered to vote, particularly if you're in Texas, because none of this is going to get better until we get better people making better decisions at large.
Yeah, the religious right is certainly voting, and they're voting a lot more than, unfortunately, the gun control people are.
Yeah, it blows my mind when I think about how closely tied this insane reverence for Jesus is, coupled with this insane reverence for assault rifles
and abortion and anti-abortion, anti-choice. Yeah,
of course.
It's a whole group of It's a cluster. It's a syndrome.
Yes. Yeah.
There we
Yeah.
can talk about a syndrome, Ethan.
The only late term abortion that you're a fan of is if it's 120 months versus 9 months.
Yeah. Right.
But
We got another super chat from Toy Ranch. I can't stay, but wish the best for Dave and everyone else. Dave will be back next week.
Good.
So, Daryl, what else, how else does religion affect people's mental health?
I think that, which we kind of hinted at several times already, it affects your mental health by giving you reasons to deny your mental health. Jesus should pray harder. Jesus should be helping you. If you're gay, pray the gay away, that sort of stuff. Purity culture is among the worst because it really says you are a horrible person for having normal human drives and urges and acting on those normally. But now you're a horrible person. Well, purity culture has fucked up a lot of people's relationships and lives. So many ways.
Right here.
Yeah. And so that's a mental health issue alone. How do I have healthy sexual relationships with the partners I choose or that I want to be with if I'm constantly got this program playing over and over and over in my head that I'm terrible, I'm a sinner, I'm going to hell? I mean, those things are hard. It's hard to get an erection when you're thinking those things. It's hard to get wet. It's hard to consummate a perfectly legitimate relationship sexually if you just have those. I know this just blew my mind when it happened to me the first 2 or 3 times. I have had clients who came to me and said, we've been married for 4 years and we've never had sex. Yeah. Okay. I had a hard time believing this.
Yeah. So do I.
And a couple of the people told me we had great sex before we got married, but when we got married, but we have not had sex since we got married 2, 3, 4 years ago. I thought, this is wild. I have never heard of this before. But then when you start scratching down below the surface, you realize they felt so damn guilty about having premarital sex that then when they did get married, they couldn't talk about it. They couldn't process it. The feeling of shame that they experienced was overwhelming. And, a simple sitting down, say, hey, how do you feel about us having sex before marriage? They couldn't do that. And they're ready to get divorced. And they're coming to my office and sitting down with me. And I'm saying, and I'm just trying to ask a simple question, how many times do you have sex a week? Not in 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of. But that's religion fucking up sex life there big time.
I would like to extend a very personal fuck you to every parent who has ever scared away and threatened any potential partners of their children, and then also a day later after turning a certain age, ask them why the fuck they didn't have grandchildren yet. On either end of the spectrum, it is none of your business. And I also wonder why that your children cannot find meaningful relationships to start their own family when you don't give them the tools.
Yeah, right.
But it's also interesting the way that sex and mental health can coincide, not even, outside of like the very specific purity culture, but also just in general. If you are dealing with mental health issues, I think that one of the first indicators that you might have is that you don't have a sex drive, that you might have a perfectly healthy relationship, but as soon as you see that is gone, I think that's pretty indicative. That's your little marker to say that maybe I should go talk to somebody. What do you think?
I think it is one of the markers we see in our own in diagnostic criteria is you go to your doctor and they say, have you lost a lot of weight or gained a lot of weight? Either one of those might be a marker for a physical illness. It could be a marker for a mental illness too. Well, the same thing is true of sex. if you got a, let's say you've got an X sex drive, and all of a sudden it drops way down for whatever reason, you might want to ask the question, what caused that? Right. Oftentimes, and I see this a lot. I mentioned my own divorce. I see this a lot in people who have a relationship breakup, is their sex drive changes dramatically. They may, for example, start masturbating 10 times a week, 10 times a day. I mean, just where they hardly were masturbating before the breakup, and now they are. Or it could go the other way. They used to have sex with their partner 3 or 4 times a week. Now they can't find a partner, and if they do, they still can't have sex, or they stop masturbating altogether. So if you see those kinds of changes, is that what you're saying, Genevieve?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that that, and then also if you are in a relationship and there's no obvious indication that there is something that is getting in the way of your sexual relationship,
right,
then something to think about is your anxiety getting in the way? Is your depression getting in the way? Right. What are you guys dealing with outside of just how your relationship is?
Well, I want to be clear. Some people have very, very low sex drives, and they may even be asexual. They're just not that interested, but they still want to be in relationship. They want to have a romantic relationship of some kind, and that's perfectly okay. But I think you and I are on the same page here. It's when you can point back to the fact that your sex drive has changed, or you've lost something you had before within the relationship. Then let's start talking about that. Talk with your partner. That alone might help a lot. And then between the two of you, you might be able to, I'll tell you, your partner is watching you. Your partner knows shit about you you do not know. You may not want to hear it, but I was at a party about a month ago. Well, and I was just talking to some people, and a guy came up to me that had read my book, Sex and God. And his wife was right behind him. And he said, "Can I talk to you about our sex life?" I'm at a party. Wait a minute. He loved my book. He wanted me to sign it, but then he wanted to talk about his sex life. Okay, I'll give you 5 minutes. Well, and she's standing there listening. And he says, we've been married. We've been together for 4 years. And we had a little bit of sex before we got married, and now we haven't had sex since we got married. Okay. I mean, the same thing I told you a little bit earlier. But he had read my book, and he realized it wasn't because he had a low sex drive. He still masturbated. In fact, I asked him right in front of his wife, "Do you still masturbate?" And he looked at me like, "Are you crazy?" I'm not going to answer that in front of my wife. I said, so I simply said, well, that would be my first question. He finally answered it. And so they didn't even have that between them. He couldn't tell her that he masturbated. I don't know. I could go on and on about people, the stories, over the years I've seen. But the fact is, these people are suffering. And then once he said, "Yeah, I still masturbate," then she stepped up, and I started talking to her. And she clearly was suffering. She clearly was hurt. Not by the masturbation. I don't think that was the main thing. It was the fact that he had not been intimate with her in 2 years since they got married. So this is not a him thing. It's a her and him thing. And I told him how you go about getting a therapist and where to get the psychotherapy project. I don't know if he followed up or not yet. I think he will. He seemed pretty sincere. But she was then able to say some things about their sex life or about their lack of communication and stuff that surprised him. Mm. I was just able, in 5 minutes, I was just able to get some communication between the two of them that was impossible before. He could not admit that he still masturbated. She could not admit to him that she felt hurt, that he wasn't attracted to her. And she was I mean, to me, she looked a very attractive woman who said, "I have a high sex drive and now it's gone. And I don't want to abandon my husband. I want to solve this problem." So by opening up the dialogue, she knew some shit about him, and he knew some things about himself. We didn't get into her side of the story too much, but there's more. Mental health and mental illness it's more than one person oftentimes. There's other people can help you or give you feedback about what they're seeing. Listen to your parents, listen to your spouse, unless they're abusive or something, but oftentimes other people notice there's been a change in you. I got a new job back years ago, and I was at a party in my own house, and we were just having fun, probably got a little bit tipsy on our wine, and a couple of my friends said, "Hey, Daryl, you changed a lot recently." And I just kind of stood back, said, "Wait a minute, what are you saying?" "Yeah, you're not as much fun as you used to be." I thought, wait, I haven't heard this before. Oh, and then my wife pops in and says, "Yeah, I've noticed it too, Daryl." Think, fuck, I'm the last person to know. And I started looking at what I'd done and what the new job was taking and all, and I realized I have changed as a result of the job. Jobs can really push you push your personality in good and bad ways. Well, in this case, it was a bad way. So that was the first time I ever went to see a counselor after that. And, the ultimate result of that was I changed jobs. I moved into a different job because I couldn't I would lose friends. My wife and I got divorced 10 years later, but I could have even been divorced then because of this. So get help. That's the theme of Hope Tonight, isn't it? Get help.
Yes, 1,000%.
We have another audience question from Anton Gomez again, 55 pesos. What if someone wants to help an RFR recovering from religion, but is taking SSRIs? How can someone like that help?
Well, if you feel like you've got control over your emotions enough, we can train you, and we've got great systems. I mean, most of the people recovering from religion are recovering from religion. I mean, most of our volunteers are recovering themselves. And I guarantee you, we got more than one on SSRI of some kind or other things. So I would not think that's a big problem. Here's the deal. If you hit the button and volunteer, go through our volunteer process, and you go through the training process, and you have to actually take practice chats, you will be able to tell if you're emotionally stable enough to do this. And I'm not kidding you. I'm not going to kid you. This is not easy work. It can be tough. There's some chats that come in that really tear people's hearts apart.
I bet.
But we have a very strong support system, and we take care of our volunteers. If a volunteer takes a chat that disturbs them, we will literally pay a therapist to talk to them for a couple of sessions. So we do not shortchange our volunteers. They're doing amazing work for us, and we want to support them. We know this is difficult work, but I would encourage you to try it. If it doesn't work for you, there's no shame in saying, this is too intense for me. I'm not emotionally stable enough for this, or I don't have the patience for it. There's nothing wrong with that. We have a significant number of people who come through the training and say, well, it's not for me, but I'm sure glad I did it because now I know what you guys do, and I'll support you. Mm-hmm. And you can also donate to us, of course. If you we'll let you do that too.
Donate your money or time. Recovering from religion welcomes both.
Yep. Yes. Right.
And Anton, I would just want to say that I think that it is wise to recognize that we all have our boundaries of what we can and cannot handle on our own, and that none of that is a moral failing on us. But I just hope, just judging by the way that you sort of phrase that question, I hope that you understand that like taking SSRIs isn't something that makes you a broken person, and that's not something that makes you less of a functional person or somebody who is not worthy of giving advice. I have a lot of friends who have PhDs and are doctors and psychiatrists, and largely all of them got into that because they wanted to understand more about why they were going through what they were going through. I just, at the end of the day, if I could sum all of this up, it would be get help. There is nothing wrong with getting help. And if you are somebody who needs help, you are not a broken person. You are just a human. So yeah, go for it, and just be kind and gentle with yourself always.
And I think we didn't emphasize enough that many therapists are doing virtual therapy these days by Skype or by, some system like this. So you don't have to go into an office. And if you can't find anybody within a reasonable distance of you, you still might be able to find somebody that would work like this. And the psychological research shows that virtual therapy seems to be about as good as real face-to-face therapy in an office, which is a bit surprising. Until COVID, there hadn't been any good research. Well, there'd been some good research on it, but since that time, we really found that maybe it's 90% as good or 95%. It's clearly really, really close to being as good as face-to-face. So don't hesitate to find somebody who can do virtual therapy with you.
Right.
And they may charge less. I mean, it's less. You may get a better break because you're doing virtual therapy. I don't know.
Well, Daryl, you've been a fantastic guest. Where can people check out more Daryl Ray at?
You can always find me on Facebook. I'm all over Facebook. I'm on Twitter, DRDRAY132 on Twitter. And Daryl at recoveringfromreligion.org is the way you can get me at Recovering from Religion. But I've also got lots of YouTube's talks. I would encourage you to go on and look. Some of them deal with mental health or different aspects of mental health, and especially around sexuality and mental health. So look at some of my talks on those things. So on YouTube. And of course, we've got lots of resources that Recover from Religion. It's not just a Daryl show. We have 300 volunteers all doing good work, and they're all finding new resources and vetting stuff. So come and look at what we got to offer if you need some help, or if you know somebody that needs some help.
And for those watching, our lovely moderators have put the links and the phone numbers for Recovering from Religion in the chat. So be sure to check them out. If you can't donate, they're always looking for volunteers. Yep. And if you need a therapist, remember, check out the Secular Therapy Project.
Go read my book, Sex and God, or The God Virus. And a lot of what we've talked about, or some of it, not all of it, are in some of those books. Thanks for having me on, Ethan and Genevieve. I appreciate it. Always good to be with you guys.
Daryl, you are such a pleasure to talk to. I cannot overstate that whatsoever. You're just best. So thanks for jumping on last minute.
All right. You're welcome.
We appreciate it.
Welcome. You're welcome.
And everyone remember, Dave Warnock, that GD show will be back next week. And thank you everyone for tuning in.
Yep. Have a good night. Thank you.